I heard a presentation by Pippenger here recently, where one of the points he's making is that we really don't know what's taken place since 2014. He's not emphasizing it as I am, but from 2014 till now, as a movement, we're not aware of what's been happening, even though we're the ones that are professing to give the message from this time period. Okay, so 2014, therefore, is a point of reference. That's why I'm saying that. Pippenger's saying we're unaware of what's went on since, by and large, in this movement since 2014 to current time. So for me, 2014 begins in 1863. The starting point to get us to 2014, to where we can say 2014 is a waymark, is 1863. And 1863 gets brought home to us in 2005. In 2005, Hiram Edson's articles are discovered, and we recognize for the first time the 2520. And this begins a process of understanding many things across the board in this movement and this message. And so now that we're at the point where we're dealing with some of the results of this message over the past 30 years, roughly, but we're reaching the conclusion of this period of time. Some of these waymarks, some of these truths become more of a, I don't know if it's point of controversy is the right word, but they become more significant than other of the waymarks. And one of them is 2014. And in order to understand 2014 as the end of a prophetic period, then we need to understand the beginning. And the beginning of our understanding is in 2005 when Hiram Edson's articles were uncovered. But you really can't understand that unless you go back to the history of Hiram Edson and understand what he was teaching in those articles. And therefore, your notes here, if any of you do not have the complete series of Hiram Edson's articles called The Times of the Gentiles, they're on the Ellen White CD-ROM. But we have, for a long period of time, had a little printout for people that includes them all. The difference with our printout and the Ellen White CD-ROM is that I went through and I cleaned up all the Roman numerals. That's how they used to mark Bible references. So I turned them into our normal expressions of the Bible verses. And I added some history in the paper at the beginning of who Hiram Edson was, and there's a little bit of background in it, so it wouldn't be paginated the same as the ones in the Review and Herald. I never retained their paragraph marks. It's just, it's the whole story with a little added overview. Therefore, if you want a copy of that, then you have to let us know. It's easy enough to print it out, but I was not going to print it out for everyone in this congregation because it's 56 pages. If you already have it and you weren't going to use it, it just takes a little bit of time on the printer to do 35 copies of 56 pages. If you want it, I have no problem giving it to you. Okay, so let me explain what's up here. And once I looked at it for myself, I know it's too small, but it's okay. This isn't any real new stuff for anyone in this room. This is the chiastic structure that arrives at 2021. Okay, so that's down the road in this study. That isn't here. This study is number 6. Okay, this study began the last time I spoke here, the last Sabbath, and then I spoke 4 times in class. This is number 6. I'm going to speak 4 times in class this coming week. That'd be 10. And then when camp meeting starts, all my presentations are going to continue on. This is one ongoing series, and we're at this point in the presentations, it's all been groundwork. Right now, I'm going to try to take one of the themes that I have put in place during the groundwork of the other 5 presentations, that being 1863, Hiram Edson, 2520. But it'll take some time to get there, okay? So in 2005, things were happening fast and furious. If you weren't there, prophetically, if you aren't aware of it. We're still in a full-pitched battle with primarily self-supporting ministry, and Adventism is still after this message and movement in that time period, fighting with them. And one of the issues of fighting with us over was what the glorious land was, and in these articles of Hiram Edson, he identifies the glorious land of Daniel 11:41 as the United States of America. That's what drew us into this study of these articles. That's where we discovered the 2520. When we discovered it, all kinds of things began to open up. All kinds of things. There's things about the 2520 in this audience here that we take for granted. We don't even think about. It's just that's the way it is. But in 2005, it wasn't. It was all brand new, and all kinds of elements connected with the 2520 were opening up. There's a lot of things going on. Moving quickly through history, those lot of things, many of them didn't get finalized. They never got finished. I don't think I have the ability to finish them now, but I am going back that history. And there are things about these articles that we recognized in 2005 that most of you probably aren't aware of because they were important at that time and place. But they weren't so important to prove the 2520 after that, so they kind of just fell by the wayside. Okay? I'll give you an example of that as we begin to go through these notes. What this is just snippets from the articles of Hiram Edson on the 2520. Okay? I've tried to include each reference in the Review and Herald, but I never counted how many there were. I think there was 5 or 6. We could probably count it together to figure it out. But my point is of the 5 and 6 articles, I comment on some of them. I've cut portions of them out. I'm going to comment on them. But some of them, like there's a couple articles where Hiram Edson is taking a lot of time on Revelation 17. And first off, I think he's wrong. And second off, it's not germane to what I'm trying to say, okay? So I'm just going to pass by it. And I say that in the printout that we have on Hiram Edson's articles. We don't believe everything that he says in there. You especially don't believe it. Because he has a statement in there where he plainly says, I don't believe in any prophecy extending beyond 1844, okay? So there's little things like that, 150 years down the road, whatever it is. But if you weren't there, and even if you were there, if you didn't catch all the little nuances of this truth opening up, then you wouldn't get some of the points. And one of the first points I want to identify for you is that it was at least 3 people. I recognized it, but 3 other people that were reading these articles when they first opened up, they came to me and said the same thing that I recognized. And it's a minor thing. It has nothing to do with anything. I mean, it's just a minor thing. But what it is everyone recognized that came to me that the prophetic logic that Hiram Edson was using was the same logic they would hear me use over and over again. Okay, so when the Lord's opening up this subject to this movement, Hiram Edson, for whatever reason, is led to start where I used to start almost every presentation. Before I would do a presentation, I'd explain certain rules of Bible prophecy and why they're important, and after we went through the rules, then we'd go into the study. That used to be how I operated. That's what Hiram Edson does. Hiram Edson starts with telling you, here's some prophetic rules that we need to consider first before we get into the 2520. And if you were familiar about the prophetic rules that we used, you would see the connection that in 2005 when this is opened up, here this message opened up, and it's opened up on the very same premise that this movement has been using. So if you weren't there when that happened and you didn't hear that happened when it happened, I'm telling you it was part of what at minimum remove those walls of prejudice that some of us may have had as we looked at this. So I was sitting back there, I'm colorblind, and I couldn't tell the difference between the orange and the black. I could tell the difference between the blue, okay? So I'm sure that some of you are having difficulty with my little spelling and maybe even the colors. Here's what I want to tell you in these articles before we go through these articles. This is Hiram Edson's work. This here isn't. He wasn't going to teach any of this that's got orange waymarks. All right? But notice 1844 has an orange waymark. Okay, Hiram Edson's going to teach 1844, but he's not going to teach 1844 as the conclusion of a 2520 like we do. The purpose of Hiram Edson's article is to say William Miller was wrong. He shouldn't have applied the time prophecy that we mark in 677 and then going 2520 to 1844. Hiram Edson was in opposition to that. So all he's going to show you is from 742 to 723 and from 723 to 1798. That's his 2520. And his 2300 begins in 457 and goes to 1844. What I want you to see here is that in Daniel 8:13 it says, "And how long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the abomination of desolation to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot." That's why I have a host above 2520 and sanctuary under the 2300. I'm wanting you to see, if you will, that Hiram Edson is seeing these two time prophecies associated with either the host, the 2520, or the sanctuary. He's got an incomplete view of it, okay, but he's using this logic. And that needs to be put in place, okay? The reason I need to put that in place, and the reason I need for you to remember that, okay? There is a reason for you to remember that, and it's over there on that chart, the upper right-hand corner, where the Lord held his hand over a mistake in the figures. It's up there in the right-hand corner, and which two prophecies are impacted by the fullness of your mistake? It's the 2300 and the 2520. Okay, so I'm saying that Hiram Edson is identifying the 2520 as the host and the 2300 as the sanctuary, and he's taking it from Daniel 8:13. So he's making a distinction on the very truths that the Lord's going to hold his hand over until he removes his hand from that sacred table. Okay, so I'm going to argue at some point in time that in December of 2016, the Lord removed his hand from a foundational error in our movement, as he did with the Millerites. Theirs was the fullness of the year error, ours the fullness of verse 40 error. We didn't understand the history between 89 and verse 41. But when the Lord removed his hand from the mistake in the Millerite history, there were two interconnected prophecies that he'd held his hand over. And I'm saying that when he removed his hand in our history in December of 2016, there were two interconnected prophecies that were brought to the surface, Raphia and Peniam. Okay, so the reason that I'm saying sanctuary and host is I'm wanting you to see these two elements, and that Hiram Edson, he wouldn't argue about what I'm saying right here at one level. He'd say 2520 is a host, 2300 is sanctuary. What I would say is that it takes 46 years for the Lord to gather that host together, and the other 2520 ends in 1844 and the temple's complete. He's not seeing that, okay? And he's arguing against Miller, so on and so forth. So let's go through these notes. That's part of what I'm wanting to do. I'm wanting to put that in place. Here, 1863, this is a big subject. If we're wrong about 1863, all this time stuff falls apart and everything else does too. If we're wrong about 1863, then we have justification for what we've taught about William Miller's dream and a variety of truths. If what we're understanding about 1863 is wrong, it's a house of cards and it's destined to come down. All right? But if what we're understanding about 1863 is correct, then it has implications for us here at the end. Okay, so anyway, I'm saying 2014 is a point of controversy, and I don't know if it's a point of controversy. It's a waymark in this movement that we need to understand that some of us don't believe that we're understanding correctly. And the way that we get to 2014 is by adding 126 years to 1888. And it brings us to 2014. We don't have the right to use 126 years until we understand that it's a symbol of the 2520, and we don't even begin to understand the 126 as a symbol of the 2520 until we begin to grapple with the idea of 1863, and then we just providentially realize that 126 years after 1863 brings you to the time of the end of 1989, and then we begin to see some implications of everything connected with that date. Okay, so we're not going to, what this is an overview of Hiram Edson's work for several purposes. I have several intended purposes, but here the color is so you can see that from here on, this is what the conclusion we're drawing. This is Hiram Edson's arguments. Okay, so in 2005, we discovered these articles. In the first article, it has, you start wondering, why did they stop the articles? And I thought from 1856 to 1863, these articles get stopped in 1856, probably because Hiram Edson was receiving some resistance. I'm not sure. It seems like he was too busy. He's going to start by saying he's overworked, and we know in this history that James White, who's going to be a personality in this history, in 1856, 7 years later, he's going to be having strokes because he's overworked. Okay, so maybe this is the job description of all the leadership of Millerite history during that time period that allows them to fall into the Laodicean condition, the worldly condition, whatever condition it is that prevents them from really ironing out what Hiram Edson was being used to open up. Okay, so page 1 of your notes, you've got the introduction here. From the editor, it says, the following article was received from Brother Edson some time since, but we have not had time to examine it thoroughly. Many of the ideas presented are new, and we think it proper to publish them for the consideration of the brethren, letting the writer remain responsible for the views presented, as he proposes in the following lines to Brother White, which accompanied the article. Then he has the dialogue, and it seems like James White is all for it. Dear Brother White, as I've been informed that the inquiry has arisen why I have remained so long silent, I would just say that I have been necessarily employed in manual labor, providing for my family, and have built little time either to read or write, and worn with excessive toil, I have felt but little disposition or spirit of writing, and hence am poorly prepared to write anything that would be of service to the church. But what little sympathy and zeal I have had in exercise for the cause of truth has been with the review, and those who have borne the heat and the burden of the day in advancing the truths it advocates. As you recently requested me to write out for the review some of the prominent leading points of my long, unmatured articles, such as the evidence on the beginning and ending of the 7 times or 20 years of Leviticus 26, and he's going to quote those verses. And then he says, as I have not at present to mature the subject, I send you a portion of the broken, unmatured ideas as they are. I do not ask that they now go out as adopted or sanctioned by the review, but merely for the examination and inspection of the brethren. And if the subject by them be judged to be of service to the church and worthy of further investigation, then it may be hereafter be revised, improved, and carried out in its further bearing and extent. That's what we did in 2005. We revised it quite a bit. Okay, now here's my point. That's interesting, so you see how the series begins. But here's what he does now. He says, but before entering upon this subject, permit me to notice, in short, an inspired rule of interpretation of prophecy. God is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Whatsoever, and I'm just jumping through this paragraph where you get my point. Hence, whatsoever things were written aforetime were written for our learning. The final deliverance and entrance of people of God into the promised eternal inheritance is to be in like manner as it was in the day that Israel came up out of the land of Egypt. So now he's saying the final deliverance of God's people was illustrated in the history of Egypt, and he's going to give a few quotes from the Bible on that. And then, of course, the one that we usually use on this subject, the one I like, he uses at the bottom of page 1, Micah 7:15. According to the days of the coming out of the land of Egypt will I show unto him marvelous things. So the history of God's deliverance of the Hebrews during the time of Egypt shows us marvelous things. Okay, that's why Sister White says the great disappointment of 1844 was typified. She doesn't say it this way, but she says it by the Hebrews crossing through the Red Sea. Okay, so he's saying, before we start this study, I want you to understand that God never changes, that the illustrations in the Bible are illustrating the end of the world. He focuses in on Egypt. Next page, he's going to continue this. He says, hence Paul testifies, now these things were our examples. Now all these things happened unto them for examples. So he's saying all the history of the Bible is an example, all right? That's where we were at. I mean, this is the same logic that we would teach when we went out and taught. And we would also use Solomon. That thing which hath been, that which shall be, and that which is done is that which shall be done, and there's no new thing under the sun. Okay? Then he talks about he compares Noah and the end of the world, and then in the paragraph that begins in boldface, Elijah was to be sent before the coming of the great and notable day of the Lord. In other words, the history of Elijah is made an example, not only of the preparatory message of the first advent given by John the Baptist, but it is also an example of the preparatory message of the second advent, an example of the voice that crieth in the wilderness, prepare you the way of the Lord. Next paragraph, examples like these might be multiplied, but the above are sufficient, in view of which we may understand why we are called upon to remember the former things of old, for God by them declares the end from the beginning. So if you're getting my point, when Hiram Edson is starting this article on the 2520, he's not using the biblical hermeneutics that are used in the seminaries of Adventism today. He's using the same rules that we were led to use when we started studying prophecy. It's just the basic biblical rules. Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. Egypt, the deliverance of Egypt, illustrating the deliverance at the end of the world. So when you're reading that, you're clicking on with this guy. You may not have known really who Hiram Edson was back in 2005 if you're waking up to it, but he's on the same wavelength everyone in this room is, I think, on how to approach prophecy. Maybe not. Okay. So in the second paragraph from the bottom, and if you don't want to get confused, wherever you see the ellipsis, it means I've cut some material out of that particular article because I'm just making a point here. Second paragraph from the bottom, the boldface part, without observing this fact and the above rule, some in reading these chapters and other like predictions might confound the downfall of destruction of ancient and modern Babylon together. He's just told us, the part I didn't read, that in Jeremiah 25 you can see the destruction of literal Babylon, but that Jeremiah just carries it on to the destruction of spiritual Babylon at the end of the world. And he says, if you don't know these rules, then you might just think it's all one story. Okay? So what is the rule that he's emphasizing here? Context. So you've got to look at it in context. It's something that we say often. If you look at Jeremiah 25 by context, the first part's talking about bringing down Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar and Belshazzar's Babylon. But it goes on to modern Babylon being brought at the end of the world. And Hiram Edson saying, if you're not going to look at the context of these passages, you're not going to get it right. Okay? And I'm only saying that at this point to emphasize that the rules that Hiram Edson is using to approach this subject is the same rules that we were using from 1989 onward. Not that there was a list of them. Okay, I've cut through some in this particular article, but notice what he says. I don't think we believe what he says here, but he's real close. Last paragraph. I understand that the establishment of the mountain or governments of the Lord's people in the last days predicted in Isaiah 2 and Micah 4 is the establishment of the government of these United States of North America. This point will be noticed more at length hereafter. So when Isaiah 2 says, and it shall come to pass in the last days that the Lord's house will be lifted up above all the hills, The mountain of the Lord's house would be lifted up above all the hills. He's saying that this is the government of the United States. He just quoted it, and he's going to say it again in the article. Is that how we understand it? No, we're understanding the and sign has nothing to do with the government of the United States. It's his people that are lifted up, and his people have their own government, okay, distinct from the government of the United States, but they're both going to get judged simultaneously. They're in some kind of symbiotic relationship, if that's the right word. This church is established in this country, and the probationary time for this country and for this church is from 1798 to the Sunday law. They're being governed in the same history. But I think Hiram was a little bit off here. I don't know. He's smarter than me across the board, no criticism, just pointing out some things here. Now, in the question next arises, and on the top of page 3, when it says the question next arises, you really can't understand what he's saying unless you go read the whole article. I'm cutting into a thought that I'm not going to explain to you, all right? Here's the question that he wants to raise. When is the appointed time for the treading underfoot indignation to end in cause? Cease. What's the appointed time? If you weren't here, and very few of you were, go to Daniel 11. Let's just do Daniel 11. For whatever reason, the expression the appointed time became a teaching point that was driven home repeatedly in this movement in the early years. And what it means is the end of a time prophecy. Now, Hiram Edson's going to say it's the end of a time prophecy, but he's going to say it's also the time prophecy itself. That's the appointed time, but the end of it is the appointed time as well. I don't have a problem with that. But my point is early on in this movement, the Lord repeatedly emphasized that the appointed time was the end of a time prophecy. Okay? So and I'm going to give you a review of where we would go when we were teaching that. In Daniel 11, verse 24, you have a time prophecy about how long Rome's going to rule the world. Daniel 11:24 says, He, Rome, shall enter peaceably upon the fattest places of the prophets, and he shall do that which his fathers have not done, nor his fathers' fathers. He shall scatter among them the prey, the spoil, the riches, yea, and he shall forecast his devices against the strongholds, even for a time. If you're not familiar with this verse, go to Uriah Smith's Thoughts on Daniel and Revelation. He will tell you this time is 360 times a year, 360 days in a year. Begins at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, and it ends in the year 330 when Constantine moves the capital of Rome from Rome to Constantinople. That's not my point. My point is that it's established in Adventism that the time in verse 24 is a period of time. It's a time prophecy. Therefore, when you get down to verse 27, speaking of the time that Rome is ruling the world, it says, And both these kings' hearts shall be to do mischief, and they shall speak lies at one table, but it shall not prosper. For yet the end shall be at the time appointed. Uriah Smith is going to tell you the end here is the year 330. That's the end of this 360-year time period, and the end thereof is the time appointed. And then in verse 29, same history, same thing. Verse 29 says, at the time appointed. So what I'm saying is, for whatever reason, and you deal with this in Daniel 8 too. The time appointed is in Daniel 8. I'm just not taking the time to give you second witnesses. But here, when it comes to Rome, verse 24, two references, verse 27, 29, say the end of that time prophecy is the time appointed. And in these articles, Hiram Edson's going to say that truth is established upon the testimony of two. Okay, so he uses that as well in this article, which is one of the rules that we often use. And in Daniel chapter 11, there's another time prophecy. Go down to verse 33. This now isn't pagan Rome. This is papal Rome. And this is an Adventist understanding. Uriah Smith's going to tell you this. But verse 33, This is the 1260 years of papal darkness, 538, 1798, and it says, and they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword and by the flame, by captivity and spoil, many days. The many days is the days that Jesus speaks about in Matthew 24. Except these days be shortened, no flesh should be saved. It's the same history, it's the 1260 years. And then in verse 35 it says, I read verse 35. It's for the time appointed. 1798 is the time appointed for the period of papal darkness. Verse 36 says, and the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished, for that is determined shall be done. This indignation, Hiram Edson's going to spend time that the indignation is accomplished in 1798. Okay, so he deals with these things, but all I'm wanting you to see is the time appointed that Hiram Edson is going to make sure that you and I understand that the time appointed is a time prophecy. It's the conclusion of a time prophecy. All right? Now notice on page 3, I'll read a little bit of that first paragraph. Advent believers generally have supposed that the appointed time for the indignation and referred to, Daniel 8:19, was the end of the 2300 days. Go to Daniel 8:19. And he said, behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. Uriah Smith is dealing with this at time appointed. I took you to Daniel 11 to show you two witnesses that a time appointed is a symbol of the end of a time prophecy. Okay? I wanted you to get that. And Uriah Smith is now saying that the Advent believers in his time period thought the time appointed for the 2520 was 1844, and they're wrong. That's what he's saying, if you get it. Okay, pardon me? Who did I say? Not Uriah Smith, Hiram Edson said that. Okay, thank you. So my point is this. He's arguing directly whether you're getting it or not. The second 2520, he's saying no, it doesn't even exist. The one that ends over here in 1844, he's saying no. This is the indignation that the 2520 is referring to in Daniel 8:19. There is an indignation that ends there, and that's in Daniel 11:36. The papacy would prosper until the end of the indignation. The papacy prospered to here. There is an end of an indignation here. But there's two indignations, and Hiram Edson couldn't see him. He saw him. He knew Miller chose the other one, but he says Miller's wrong. And he could only see this one, all right? So that's what he's teaching here. He's teaching why Miller was wrong. And notice what he says here. This is the next paragraph. I don't know if I can convey this, but if you read it through a couple times, you'll get it on your own. It is worthy of note that the time when Gabriel said to Daniel, at the time appointed the end of the indignation shall be, that there had then no revealed appointed time been given to cover the length of the indignation and reveal its end, except the 7 prophetic times of Moses. So what he's saying is, when Gabriel comes to Daniel and says, I'm going to reveal to you what the last end of the indignation is, he's saying there's only one prophecy in the Bible of the indignation that has an element of time connected to it. So it could only be that one prophecy. And he's correct, except he's not seeing two 2520s. It can only be the 7 times of Leviticus 26 that Gabriel is referring to. Okay, that's his piece of argument in here. And it's worth getting that in your mind. And all of the next paragraphs are good, but time's slipping away, so let's go to page 4. You see the heads of the Review and Herald that we're moving through these series of articles. I'm only taking certain things from certain things. On page 4, where it says, by Hiram Edson, continued, The way is now prepared to establish next in order. The beginning and ending of the 7 times are 20 years. Now I want you to get this. Hiram Edson, I haven't looked as deep into him as I should, so I don't really know. But Hiram Edson, he's supportive of James and Ellen White and the Spirit of Prophecy. He's just supportive of them. He isn't at odds with them. Some of the pioneers, you have histories where they were at odds with them. I don't know of that with Hiram Edson. It seems like he was in tune with them all the way through. So I'm going to go with it like that. And I'm going to trust that he was a faithful, honest-hearted man and that the Lord was really using him, because the Lord chose to speak to him on October 23rd and reveal the movement from the holy to the most holy place. I have no reason to doubt that he's not also, in 1856, trying to open up light through him. So I'm going to say that he was probably sympathetic and supportive of the Spirit of Prophecy. Okay? So here you can see him getting in a trap. Next paragraph. The Advent chart of 1843, without a doubt, was arranged in the order of God's counsel. And if you read through it, he's going to identify a singular mistake, just like we do, and that it's the fullness of year. But what's he doing? He's acknowledging, like we do, the authority of the 1843 chart. We do that too. But what's he doing? He's attacking it. Because in early writings, Sister White says, I saw that the 1843 chart was directed by the hand of the Lord and should not be altered. And what he's doing is he's saying, we should take the center line out of the 1843 and the 1850 chart that begins in 677 and goes to the conclusion of the 2520 in either case, and remove it. So at one hand, he's saying, the chart is right on. But at the other hand, he's saying we need to remove that from there because that's wrong. I'm not so sure that the reality of Sister White's counsel on both charts, because she had things to say about the 50 charts, finally didn't come home to Hiram Edson and him realize, I need to back out of this study, and maybe that's why they ended. I don't know. The historical record's silent. But in any case, he's supportive of the 43 chart, but you don't like the centerpiece of the 43 or the 50 chart, which is the column of the 2520 that begins in 677 that he will speak against as you proceed down here. And I'm not putting him in a light for speaking against it. I'm not trying to do that. But notice the center of this page 4, where he begins, and as I understand the time, which the angel of Revelation 10, 5, and 6 swore should be no longer, included all prophetic time, and that the testimony given and the most solemn oath was fulfilled in the time of the 10th of the 7th month, move 1844, movement, probably 7-month movement, 1844. You know what, were you reading with me? I'm sure that word move should be movement. But I cut and pasted it, so I don't, anyway. Hence, I believe that all the prophetic periods were then ended, and none of them can extend beyond that point. Okay, so we're not doing service to Hiram Edson's conviction about his studies when we say, no, what Hiram Edson opened up for us is Isaiah 7, a civil war between King of the South and King of the North in the literal glorious land 19 years before 723, in agreement with, and he does mark this, I meant to put this up here, Hiram Edson acknowledges this 65 years of Isaiah 7, 8. But he doesn't know what to do with Manasseh because he's rejecting the idea of that as a starting point in 677. Okay, so where was I? Just seeing that. The next point is his arguments against 677. Then on the bottom of the page 4, it says, this then is the inspired historical event and its chronology, which is 723 is the point from which to reckon the 20 years of captivity. Next paragraph. This was 19 years after Isaiah's prophecy recorded in Isaiah 17:8. Here's your 19 years. 7, 8, and Then he's going to tie it in with Luke 21, 24, and 25. All right, so now I'm on page 5, and I went on page 1, 2, 3, 5, on the 4th paragraph. Notice something else that he's emphasizing. I can't remember. I've been trying to remember. Some of these concepts, whether you understand it, brothers and sisters, some of these concepts became the logic we used to present the 2520. But most people think it's our logic, and we didn't recognize it. We just took it from Hiram Edson. Why not? It's valid. So some of these things I know came after we learned about Hiram Edson's articles, but some of them I think we knew a little bit about them before. But in this paragraph I'm pointing you to, you know what he's doing? He's emphasizing Palmoni, the wonderful number. How many Adventists you ever heard emphasize Palmoni? That's what he's doing, Hiram Edson, in connection with these time prophecies. Who else emphasizes Palmoni? This movement. Okay, so there was lots of reasons to get sucked into this when it came to surface in 2005. And when I'm saying get sucked into it, I mean in a positive way. Okay, so there's a really subtle truth in here. If you'll watch, it applies to our history. It's worth seeing. But he's going to make a case over the next few articles. I don't know if he makes a case, but he's going to weave it in. That there's a hidden truth that the Millerites needed to understand, and that hidden truth was time prophecy, but more specifically, it was the 2520. Okay, so he's going to talk about hidden truth, and we know we're in a time when there is hidden truth, and we know in the time that we believe we were in the hiding is when this truth about Edson and all 2014 and everything else has come to light. So I just want you to see that he is addressing hidden truth. Okay, so I'll begin in the 3rd paragraph from the bottom, 4th from the top. From the fact of the important question under consideration being proposed at the close of the vision by the numberer of secrets, or the wonderful number or margin, I understand that the burden and great object of this vision, this is Daniel 8:13, is where you find the wonderful numberer, to reveal not only the agents, but particularly the duration and the end of the appointed time of giving the host to be trodden underfoot. The appointed 7 prophetic times of Moses' prophecy was a portion of the hidden wisdom of God, hidden for ages. And he goes into Daniel 11, verse 40, but I'm going to pass over that once again because of time. And I'd tell you need to take the articles in their fullness and read them a couple times just to see some of the... And I know some of you read it 15 years ago or whenever it was. But I was blessed by reading it again here recently. I'm on page 6 now. And the 2nd paragraph says, but at the very important point, the main secret of the hidden wisdom yet remained to be unfolded. The key had not been given to unlock and reveal the manner of time contained in the appointed 7 times. So he's saying the secret hidden wisdom is the 2520. If that is a fact of Millerite history, then the secret hidden wisdom of our history would be... What? No. Be the 126. Be the 126, wouldn't it? It would be the thing that brings us into the place where we're going to see all this hidden wisdom, which is the midnight cry. But what gets you there is this. It's this here. If you don't have the 126 to make the connection from 1863 to the time of the end, you don't get there. Anyway, maybe I'm putting that in the wrong light, but notice in the 4th paragraph, it says the burden of Daniel's anxiety, you see that? In this, his diligent inquiry is couched in the little word, what? Okay, and Daniel has asked Gabriel, what shall be the end of these things? And where, by the way, I meant to say this, and I forgot. So I want you to get this. It's the mistake, one of the mistakes Edson makes. In verse 19 of Daniel 8. when you read it, you're going to see that the idea of the indignation is very important and crucial to Hiram Edson. That's what he's dealing with. The 2520 is God's indignation against his people. So he's dealing with that. I'm just taking one little verse, and I don't want you to not see the connection. Gabriel's coming to Daniel. Daniel has seen the vision that begins in verse 3 of Daniel 8. By the time he gets to verse 12, the vision's over. Now he's going to hear a heavenly dialogue for verses 13 and 14. And as soon as that vision and the heavenly dialogue is given to him, he's going to ask the question, I want to know about this vision of 2,300 days. And Gabriel is sent to make him understand. October 22nd, 1844. And the way he does it is by giving him a second witness. He's going to give him a second time prophecy that ends at the same point in time. And in verse 19, Hiram Edson can't see his second 2520 that ends in 1844. He can't see it. Miller's wrong. That's all he's seeing. But he's making his case that the indignation that's being dealt with ends in 1798. But because he does not see both 2520s, he's convinced Miller is fully wrong and that there's only one accurate application of the 2520, he can't read verse 19 correctly. And it says, and he said, behold, I will make thee know, Gabriel's going to make Daniel know, what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. What's the most important word in there? Last. If there's a last, there's a first. So he's taken the first end of the indignation and putting it at 1798 when the papacy received the deadly wound, and that was the end of the indignation. But he's not seen the last end of the indignation, which is over here in 1844. Okay, so that's okay. That's where he was at, to leave this piece of information for us here in 2005. I'm not bad-mouthing, not trying to bad-mouth Hiram Edson. One thing he does, and you'll see it in these articles, and if you drop to the last paragraph, you will see it on page 6. During the 45 years of the latter-day glory and the rise, triumph, and prosperity of Zion, please, when you're reading these articles, notice that Hiram Edson's, one of his punchlines, that he's not being minorly inferred, is this gathering of God's people at the end of the scattering is the final manifestation of the church triumphant. He's saying this is what it's all about, is how the Lord gathers together this final church triumphant, okay, at the end of this scattering time. So he's going to say 1798 to 1844 is 45 years. Is it 45 years? If you take 1798 and subtract it from 1844, is it 45 years? Okay, so we understand it to be 46 years. But what he's doing is he's saying the first day of the first month in 1844 was April 19th. Therefore, 1843 actually ended in April 18th, 1844. And he's just being careless or he's being exclusive in his application. He's not saying, okay, this prophecy reached 4 months into 1844, so I can include 1844. I don't know what he's doing, all right? But from here on out, he's going to use 45 for what we understand to be 46, okay? So don't stumble over that, even though we don't fully know what went wrong with his mathematics, okay? Last paragraph there on page 6. During the 45 years of the latter-day glory and the rise, triumph, and prosperity of Zion, many were to be purified, made white, and tried. The trial to the great mass came in the closing scenes of the 45 years. The unpopular doctrine of the speedy coming of our Lord is given in the message of the first angel of Revelation 14, 6, and 7, proved to be the test and turning point for the great body of Protestants. This is all... Okay, second paragraph on page 7, he's continuing this thought. It says, hence from the above considerations, the fact must be apparent to all that the latter-day glory and the rise, triumph, and prosperity of Zion, and which constitutes the blessing predicted by Daniel 12, was realized during the 45 years between 1798 and 1844. Here then, the prophetic pencil has traced the lines and set bounds of the latter-day glory. Isn't the latter-day glory the church triumphant, the end sign? Okay, so this is his focus. And every effort to remove them must prove ineffectual. All right. Now, you have another article right underneath that, but it didn't get printed. Notice what it says. Battle Creek, Michigan, January 31st, 1856. The manuscript for the continuation of Brother Edson's articles on the time of the Gentiles is not received at the date of the closing of this paper, January 30th. So it's not until February 14th that he gets his next article in. And this is where he's going on about Revelation 17. I didn't put much in there, but it's this particular last article where he's going to identify the glorious land as the United States. So if you go to page 8, the last couple paragraphs there at the end is where he does that. Okay, that's kind of a cursory view of that. 7 minutes to put this in place. Okay, I want you to see that his logic was incomplete. And in 2005, we took this, and I don't know the right word, but I've heard Parminder teach this more than once. I've heard people talk about it. And there's got to be a better word, okay, than what I'm going to use, but it's one I've heard. It's in the beginning of this movement, our application of prophecy was accurate, but it was a miracle. It was what we were identifying as the prophetic message. It was accurate. It was like what Tyler was saying today. The message was perfect from beginning to end. But now we're in a time period where the Lord isn't going to perform the miracles of prophetic application that he did in the past. Now we have to come to grips with how to rightly divide the Word of God and stand on that methodology. Okay, so, but nevertheless, the argument is that the truths that we identified over these years, they were right. Okay? So what I'm saying is, I don't know when I think about it why the methodology identifying Hiram Edson would have been wrong, or if it was wrong, but it nevertheless got applied correctly. I don't know how you separate. Anyway, if it was a miracle, you just do it with no methodology attached, perhaps. So, but here's how we did it. And this is not methodology. You know this story. Everyone here knows this story. I ran out of things to preach in California, and the brethren wanted to go on throughout the Sabbath days. They say, tell us something else. I just read these articles. So I put these two 25-20 time prophecies on the board. And for the first time in human history, I'm sure, both 25-20s were put on the board together, but I put them on the board line up on line in front of everyone. And at that point, I just read them. I didn't know whether, I wasn't so settled into what Sister White says about these charts yet. I wasn't threatened by whether I was going to agree with Hiram Edson or not agree with him. I knew there was authority in the pioneer understanding, but I didn't know whether Hiram Edson was right or William Miller was right. They were at odds historically on the 25-20, so I just put them both on the board and treated them as if they were right. And they were. Okay, there was no methodology in that. It was just a providential action in the afternoon. But from that, this one ending in 1798, this one ended in 1844. With this 46 years marked by these two 25-20 time prophecies, we get led down the road of time setting. That's how we got there. Because once we could see that both of these were valid, and that there was a 2520 that came to here, that they were all together, then we could see 19, 46, 46, 19. And when we seen the 19, we seen 1863. And we were in trouble now. we're off setting time. We don't even know. We're not even going to set time for whatever that would be, 2005 to 2018. We're not going to set time for another. Parmenter is going to try in 2012, but as a movement, we're not going to do it till 2018. So it's here where it all starts. Do you understand why it all starts here? Because when you get to here, we're going to see 126 years to 1989, the time of the end, and we're going to be building a time model without even knowing it from that point on, down the stream of time. So here's my dilemma. I'll give you my dilemma in closing. I got 2 minutes. All right, I'll summarize this and close. I'm saying that here in 1856, Hiram Edson was raised up just like he was in 1844. This is Edson at this point and this point. To clarify the 2300 days. And here, the Lord's wanting to clarify the 2520. But he can't do it. Something's went on. The zeal of God's people by 1856, something's happened that they're not in the pursuit of tracing down prophecy like they were at the beginning of the Millerite history. And this is where, this 7-year period, that leads to William Miller's dream. And William Miller's dream is about the covering up of the truths. And all of that light that happens here when William Miller's dream is connected with this, I think we need to deal with in order to understand 1863. I mean, there's lots of prophetic fulfillments in 1863, whether it's bringing down Jericho and the death of Ellen and James White's 2 children, the beginning of the church center of the Civil War, a health message arrives. There's all kinds of fulfillments prophetically of 1863. But there's things that happen post-1863 that happen with us post-1863 in our understanding. Okay? All right, I know how to close it out. For instance, I gave you William Miller's first dream. Did everyone get William Miller's first dream? Olden days, we never realized that William Miller had 2 dreams. His first dream, I think 1826. Just so you know it, there was at least 3 pioneer periodicals before 1844 that printed William Miller's first dream and believed that they were legitimate spiritual dreams. And what I handed out to you, there's a pioneer named Ronald Arnold. I believe his name's Ronald, but his last name's Arnold. David Arnold. He's going to write the pioneer overview of what William Miller's first dream represented. Okay, I want you, just in bringing this to a close, once we saw this history from 1863 here, I don't know if you're aware of how many things were opened up. And of course, Hiram Edson is saying the 2520 was the key that opened up the mystery truths for their day and age. I'm saying the 126, beginning in 1863, it opened up truths such as this. No one in human history had ever recognized that the 2 dreams of Nebuchadnezzar were pointing forward to William Miller's 2 dreams. And they are. And it's airtight. And no one had recognized that the 1st chapter, 2nd chapter, and 3rd chapter of Daniel was the 3 angels' messages of Revelation 14, 6 through 12. But they are. And no one had recognized that chapter 4 of Daniel was the beginning of Adventism and chapter 5 is the end of Adventism. Okay, we don't get led into those kind of revelations till we begin to grapple with these truths here that come to light, with recognizing that this is William Miller's dream. So I intend to cover some of those subjects in the next few presentations. But as I do, I want you to remember that one of the things that Hiram Edson was making the claim of is that the 2520 is the key that opens up this hidden wisdom. But for us, that would be the 126. And I'm going to argue that the same thing's happening with the 126. You don't get to 2014 without the 126. Okay? And 2014 is where we're having some struggles internalizing what it represents at this point in time. So, this over here I've showed you before. I still intend to deal with that. You know what these waymarks are without me mentioning them. I wish this was a class. I'd ask if there was any questions, but it's not a class. So, are there any questions? Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we understand the Millerite history is to be related to as a parable that is going to be played out in our history because Jesus illustrates the end from the beginning. And as we look back to this early Advent history, we see the work of Hiram Edson in 56 leading to 63 as illustrating something in our history conveyed to us in the form of a parable that we have a responsibility to come to grips with. We ask that as we proceed through these studies, you would continue to open up light for us and give us the wisdom and grace to bring that light into our own personal experience. In Jesus' name, amen.